So this is lesson 2 in the Android learning path, and this lesson is all about understanding the basics of the Android operating system, and we're going to do that by creating a very generic Android application using Eclipse, the integrated development environment that we talked about in the previous lesson, along with the Android tools that we've installed into the Eclipse environment. So in order to do this, we're going to get rid of this previous project that we discussed. This is the project that we downloaded from our Buzztouch control panel that you might have seen in the previous lesson. We didn't talk about it much, but it was over here kind of lingering in the package explorer. So the first thing I'm going to do for this lesson is I'm going to delete this project from the Eclipse environment. That way we have a blank slate, something to start fresh from scratch with. So because Eclipse now has the Android Virtual Device Manager and the Android SDK Manager installed as components into the development environment, we have a couple of new options. We have in the new menu, we have an option here for an Android project. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create an Android project just as if you would without Buzztouch. This lesson isn't even going to talk about Buzztouch, and it's going to talk about the normal flow for creating a new Android project from scratch. So we're going to choose File and then New, and then we're going to say Android Project. And a dialog is going to open, and it's going to ask us a few questions about this project we're creating. So it's going to ask us the project name, so we'll enter the same name, Monterey Harbor. And we're going to use the default location, and what that means is Eclipse is asking us where would you like to save this project. I'll hit the Next button, and the next screen is going to ask us what build target would we like to use. Now this does confuse people, but most of us understand, even non-developers understand, that there's lots of different Android devices and lots of different Android operating systems in the wild out there. And when it asks you to select a build target, what it's saying is which kind of a device do you want to deploy this application on? And so there's a lot of different debates out there about what's the best one. Because most of the Buzztouch projects, or all of the 2.0 Buzztouch projects, should be based on Google 2.2 APIs, we're going to go ahead and choose that for this example too. So we'll choose Google APIs version 2.2 for our build target, and we'll say Next. And then it's going to ask us what should we name our package, and what should we name our application. You can see that it changed that to a capital. Just some basic things. Most package names follow a convention like that. Usually it's com dot and the project name and then .com. This lesson doesn't discuss some of the details about package names, so you're best to stick with a convention like this before you get too worried about how all of the different packages are named and put together. So we're going to hit Finish. And the Android Software Developer Kit, working in conjunction with Eclipse, is going to create us a project. So this is what we call a blank Android project. So because we use the built-in method to create a new Android project, we have a series of files here on the left that are important, very important in fact. So there's a few files and a few directories, and each of these directories has a purpose. So we're going to spend a few minutes and explore what these different directories or what these different folders do and what they're for in this blank project. So the top folder here is called Source, and this folder is going to contain all of the Java source code files for your Android project. So there'll be lots of files in this folder here when you download your Buzztouch project, but in this example we only have one. The generated folder, this is not something that you'll ever change. This is something that the Android development environment in Eclipse control for you. They're going to write some code in this r.java file for you automatically. So don't ever mess with the generated folder. And then this pointer here, this isn't actually a folder. This is a pointer to the libraries that we chose when we selected the target, when we added the new project. So because we told Eclipse that we wanted to create an Android 2.2 project and base that project on the Google APIs, it's created a reference or a pointer to a couple of files that we will use, that Eclipse will use when we compile this project. So you're not going to be messing with anything in here. The assets folder is empty right now, but the assets folder is a nice place to put project assets, things like audio and video and things like that that you might add to your project. The bin folder isn't something that you'll mess with. The bin folder is a place where Android and Eclipse, well, Eclipse really, not Android. The bin folder is where Eclipse will put some of the builds when you compile and build your application, which we haven't even talked about yet. But these three folders, generated, this pointer here, and bin, you're not going to be changing anything inside of those. So really, you have the source folder and then the resources folder. And inside the resources folder, you've got a lot of subfolders or subdirectories. So the key point of exploring these project files is for you to get your head around the idea that Eclipse created this for us. It created this structure for this project for us, and we didn't have to do it. So it's not horribly important that you understand exactly what each of these directories do yet. It will make sense a little bit as we continue. The file that we want to talk about, though, is the Android manifest. And the Android manifest file is very, very important, and it controls a lot of different things about the way your application works and how the Android operating system on the device itself communicates with your application or understands your application. So every Android application has an Android manifest, and they are all named Android manifest.xml with precisely that name. You can't name it anything else. And this manifest file, when we double click on it and open it in the editor here, we can also use the editor to edit the Raw Xml, which is the way that I usually run, excuse me, the way that I usually do my edits. And that's because I like to see exactly what I'm changing. So the purpose of this lesson is to help us understand how Android works. And so the reason that this Android manifest file is so important, and the reason that every single application on a device has an Android manifest file, is because the Android operating system uses this file to understand, for example, the package name. And you'll notice that the package name matches the package name in our source code folder here in our project. It knows the minimum SDK version. If you remember, when we set up our project, we chose Google API's Android 2.2, which is SDK version 8. So that matches this. It describes a lot of the different screens. They're called Android activities. It describes a lot of different permissions. Right now we don't have any permissions set up in the manifest. But it tells the Android operating system lots of different things. When the user installs the application, the Android operating system reads this manifest information. Additionally, this information is used in the Google Market. If you were to upload your application to the Google Play Market, that upload process also reads your manifest information and tries to figure out things like, does another application exist with this package name, and all those kinds of things. So let's jump on the internet here for a second, and let's look at the documentation for the Android manifest. And we're not going to stay here long, but I just wanted to show you that if you just did a good quick Google search for Android manifest file, you'll see here in the documentation a very precise description of what the manifest file does. So you'll spend a lot of time early on when making Android applications manipulating this manifest file. So its purpose, to summarize this little section real quick, its purpose is to tell the Android operating system important pieces of information about the application, and in some cases to tell markets such as the Google Play Market some information about the application also. So the next thing we need to do before we can understand how the Android operating system works is to get this application running. We haven't made any changes to our source code or anything. We've just simply created an empty example Android app. And now in order to run this app, we need to create an emulator or a simulator. So I'm going to use this shortcut button right here in the top left, and I'm going to open the Android Virtual Device Manager. And this screen, if you remember from the last lesson, helps us organize from one to many Android simulators or emulators. So we need to create a new simulator to run this application in. And so we're going to use the New button, and we'll call this simulator My First Simulator. and we need to choose a target to create the simulator for. In other words, what kind of a device do we want to simulate? And we need to choose a target that matches the API level that we created our application with. So we chose Google APIs Android 2.2. So we will choose Google APIs Android 2.2 for our target for our simulator. We're going to ignore the rest of these details, although you can choose all different kinds of options when you create a simulator. And I'm going to create this AVD, or Android Virtual Device. So this Android Virtual Device is set up in our Virtual Device Manager screen, and it will stay here as long as we continue working in Eclipse. When I come back to the project after closing it or whatever, it'll still be in our list. So I'm going to start this simulator right now, which is not how I normally do my testing, but I want to start it to show you that it will run just like you would expect. So I'm going to launch this simulator, and the one thing I want you to notice is how long it takes for the simulator to start running. This is an important concept. The simulator screen will come on, will open up, but it will take quite a while for Android to actually launch and start running in this simulator, and that can be a little bit annoying sometimes. But I haven't come up with any shortcuts or solutions to get the simulator to launch faster than it just kind of does automatically or naturally. So I usually start my simulators as soon as I sit down and start my development work. I usually start my simulators in Eclipse real fast so that it's running for me already when I go to launch my project. It just makes it a lot faster that way. So the simulator's done launching, and when it's done launching, it will show you the Android operating system's home screen for the version that you chose. The simulator that you set up may not look this way because you may choose a different API level. If you're working with a Buzztouch project, it'll a 2.0 Buzztouch project, it'll be Android 2.2, Google APIs 2.2, so it will always look like this in your simulator, but it will simulate the operating system that you set up in your simulator. So I'm going to minimize this, and then I'm going to close my Virtual Device Manager window, and we're going to go back to our application. And what we want to do now is we want to run this application in this simulator, the one that's running in the background, this one here. So I'm going to leave this running. I'm going to move this to the side so you can see what's going on. And I'm going to choose our project on the left, and then I'm going to choose from the menu the Run button. So what ends up happening is Eclipse and the Android SDK are going to work together, and they're going to compile all of the source code that we have on our project on the left into an APK file, an application file, and install it on the simulator. So you can see in the console all sorts of information about that process. So Eclipse is telling us that it's installing the Monterey APK on the simulator, and then it's starting an activity, and all of the details about that process display in the console. Now I will tell you that I cheated a little bit, and I stopped the recording and let that happen, and then came back to it because I didn't want to wait and just have you sit there staring at the screen. But just understand that installing on the simulator process may take a few minutes on your workstation. It kind of depends on how you're set up and how powerful your computer is. But I'm going to bring the simulator to the front, and I'm going to show you that this application, as basic as it is running in the simulator, and I can use these controls to, for example, go back to the Android home screen on the device, and I can do all kinds of different things with my simulator, just like I can do with a regular device. So if I use the menu button, I can see different settings on the screen and things like that. And so the purpose of this lesson was to understand the Android operating system. And I know we've talked a lot about Eclipse and how to get a project running in the simulator, but that is important. It is an important concept because it's all related. And so the last thing that we're going to talk about here is what the Android operating system is actually doing. And so what the Android operating system is doing when it runs your application, and if I hold this home button down for a sec here, I should be able to get our Monterey Harbor icon back up, and here's our icon. So what it's doing is it's controlling all of the applications on the device, which application is running in the forefront, which applications are running in the background, and which applications are being interacted with. So the developer doesn't have to worry about that stuff. That's what the Android operating system is doing for us. And so we didn't write any code in this sample project. We didn't do anything special. We just created a new Android project, created a simulator, launched it in the simulator, and now we're trying to understand how Android is controlling this application. And so it let us install it because no package with this package name was already on the device, so it let us install it. It lets us send it to the background using the home button. It lets us bring it back to the foreground anytime we tap on its icon. And so the Android operating system is controlling all of that stuff for us. And so fundamentally speaking, it's the job of the Android operating system to manage all of the applications that are on the device and which applications are in the background and which application is in the foreground. Only one application at a time can be in the foreground, but lots of applications can be running in the background. So Android's job is to focus on understanding what's installed on the device and then managing those applications. And it does that by learning and reading about each application in each application's manifest file. Now I realize that talking about Android in such simple terms may be a little bit unreasonable, but the concept here is I want you guys to understand, and I want new developers to understand, that we don't have to worry about all of the different applications that are running on the device in most cases, and we don't have to worry about which one's in the foreground and which one's in the background in most cases. Android's going to do that for us. Android's going to deal with the battery level on the device. It's going to help us with the camera and the GPS and all the different hardware. The operating system itself takes care of all of those details. We, the developer, all we normally worry about is what's happening when our application is in the forefront and what's happening when our application is being interacted with. Of course, there's some advanced topics about managing your application when it's in the background and how to interact with other applications on the device, but that goes beyond the scope of what we're trying to discover here in this lesson, which is, what does Android do? So to summarize it all up and to end this lengthy lesson, we're going to say that Android's primary job is to manage all of the applications installed on a device, which applications are running, and which applications are not running. It's pretty much that simple. The operating system does all of that for us.